Welcome, infrastructure admins. Today, we're diving into an explainer on a very specific, absolutely crucial subtopic. NCP-MCI 7.5 16.5 recommended upgrade order. If you're gearing up to ace the NCP-MCI 7.5 exam, specifically focusing on the baseline of AOS 7.5, AHV 11.0, and PC 7.5, understanding this exact sequence of operations is basically mandatory. We aren't just talking about mindlessly clicking next here, we're talking about how you actually maintain cluster health during some pretty complex lifecycle operations.
Okay, let's take a quick look at our agenda. First, we'll cover why upgrade order matters, then connected sites auto-sequencing, followed by dark sites manual sequencing. After that, we'll hit some common exam traps, and finally, the key facts you absolutely need to memorize.
Section 1. Why upgrade order matters, and setting the stakes for your infrastructure. Right, before we get too deep into the weeds, let's just make sure we're on the exact same page with a few foundational acronyms. LCM, or Lifecycle Manager, is our end-to-end update tool that streamlines this whole process across the cluster. AOS, the Acropolis operating system, well, that's the foundational software platform running on the cluster. And AHV is the native Acropolis hypervisor. Understanding how these three specific pieces interact during an upgrade cycle is really the core of this entire exam objective. So why do we care so much about order? Well, the age of your hardware is a huge factor for successful software operation, right? Running outdated hardware obviously leaves you vulnerable to security risks. But here's the catch. Blindly patching systems out of order will straight up break dependencies and cause catastrophic cluster failures. Think about it. If the underlying AOS isn't ready for a new hypervisor version, or if a physical board's firmware gets updated before the management framework even understands how to talk to it, things break. Nodes get stranded, and downtime is practically guaranteed. So understanding the why behind the order, yeah, it's non-negotiable. Moving right along to Section 2, connected sites auto-sequencing versus dark sites manual sequencing. This is where things get really interesting, because there is a massive operational divide based entirely on internet connectivity. Connected sites use what I like to call LCM magic. They auto-sequence everything using compatibility and dependency databases. If you select all components in a connected site, LCM seamlessly does the math and figures out the upgrade order with absolutely zero manual intervention from you. But on the flip side, we have dark sites. These are clusters with no internet connectivity, and they force you, the administrator, to follow strict manual rules known as the recommended upgrade order. Let's look a little closer at how a connected site actually handles this. LCM is basically doing all the heavy lifting automatically. First off, it runs a series of pre-checks. If even one check fails, it stops you dead in your tracks. Next, it identifies available component updates and intelligently batches them together based on their specific dependencies. Finally, it chooses a node, performs the update, brings the node back up, and, this is a huge point, it waits until the cluster data resiliency is back to a normal state before moving on to the next node. If you don't wait for that normal state, you're risking total data loss during the subsequent node reboots. Now, you might be wondering, why exactly does it batch these updates? Well, to reduce cluster downtime, LCM only performs the pre-update and post-update actions once per batch. For example, on Nutanix NX platforms, the basic input/output system, or BIOS, depends directly on the baseboard management controller, or BMC. LCM just knows this. It intelligently groups them and enforces that the BMC updates first before the BIOS update on each node. You don't have to configure that, it just handles it. This is your first really concrete example of why underlying dependencies dictate the upgrade order. All right, Section 3, Dark Sites Manual Sequencing. Just take a look at the official upgrade workflow for software and firmware. It is incredibly complex. It's basically a giant web of decision trees, and it really proves exactly why memorizing the documented order is so vital. When LCM can't reach out to the release APIs to pull the latest logic, like in a dark site, the burden of avoiding dependency failures falls 100% on your shoulders. You have to evaluate the entire stack, from the baseboard management controller all the way up through the hypervisor, and manually calculate what goes first, second, and third to keep your cluster healthy. So here is your rigorous manual sequence, and trust me, you need to know this cold for the exam. Number 1, always update the LCM framework itself so the engine actually doing the work is on the latest version. 2, upgrade Nutanix Cluster Check, that's NCC, and your Prism Central components. 3, upgrade AOS. 4, upgrade your hypervisor, which in our baseline is AHV. And here's your second concrete example of why order matters. AOS has to be upgraded before AHV because the underlying Acropolis OS needs the latest management constructs in place to properly control the newer hypervisor version. If you do that backward, you literally lose management of your VMs. Finally, step 5. Perform another LCM inventory and upgrade any available firmware. Software first, firmware at the absolute end. Let's pivot to section 4, common exam traps, and a few insider secrets. Listen up, because the exam writers absolutely love to test this. They will give you a dark site scenario and seriously tempt you to apply a critical firmware patch before you've touched the LCM framework, Prism Central, or AOS. They'll probably word it to make the firmware patch sound incredibly urgent, like you needed to save a failing component right this second. Yeah, do not take the bait. Nutanix is super clear on this. They strongly recommend you never update firmware as a first step because it breaks software dependencies. The newer firmware might not even be understood by the older AOS or LCM version. It will absolutely fail your upgrade, it'll likely strand a node, and it will definitely cost you points on the exam. Always, always do your software and framework first, and your firmware last. Here's another sneaky edge case you'll probably see. Single node clusters. LCM cannot update firmware on single node clusters. Why? Well, because firmware updates require node reboots. In a multi-node cluster, your VMs can migrate, and data resiliency is perfectly maintained by failover nodes during that reboot cycle. But in a single-node cluster, you don't have a failover node. Because of that, LCM blocks this entirely to prevent unexpected service interruptions. You actually have to update single nodes manually following the specific hardware administration guide. Okay, bringing it all home with section 5, key facts to memorize. If you take nothing else away from this explainer, make sure you mentally screenshot these core points. LCM perfectly handles connected site dependencies using its database. Dark sites demand that you manually sequence following the exact documented order we covered. Always update the LCM framework first so the engine is ready to go. Never upgrade firmware first. Leave it for the absolute last step after AOS and AHV. And finally, remember that single nodes require manual firmware updates due to those downtime constraints. To wrap things up, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative scenario to chew on for your studies. Let's say you do mess up the manual sequence and you strand a node in Phoenix, which is the Nutanix firmware update environment, for over an hour. How do you actually recover it? The documentation mentions a specific LCM_node_recovery script, but it carries a massive glaring warning not to run it unless you understand exactly why the node got stranded in the first place. I highly recommend diving into the LCM troubleshooting guide as your very next step to master that exact real-world scenario. Good luck studying, and thanks for joining me.